for Vanity Fair and host of the Fast Politics podcast, and Juanita Tolliver, MSNBC political analyst and author of the forthcoming book, A More Perfect Party: The Night Shirley Chisholm and Diane Carroll Reshaped Politics. It is good to see you all. David Jolly, if you had someone at your family holiday who was sort of whipping through this grab bag of grievances, talking about a person who hadn't been president in 8 years as though they were president today, you'd say, I think it's time for you to head home. I think this party is wrapping up now. And instead, it turns out for the United States, this party is just beginning. What do you make of what we heard from the incoming president?
Yeah, welcome to the next 4 years. I'll take your metaphor a step further, which is if this guy was at your holiday party last year, you wouldn't have invited him back, because this is a lot like what he did last year and what he did on Easter. I think you can look at this in two lenses. The more generous interpretation would be about Donald Trump's kind of disgusting political strategy always, which is he can't be a hero if there's not a villain. And so at a time when Joe Biden is sending out messages of unity, Donald Trump can't have that, because his rise to political power came by birtherism and injecting division and relying on the Fox News and right-wing platforms that were metastasizing division as he was coming up. So part of that is strategy. That would be a generous interpretation. I think the more likely one, if we don't overthink it, is just the raw narcissism. We see him do this on holidays, on Christian holidays. The man, Alicia, is jealous of Jesus Christ himself. We saw this last December. We saw this on Easter. We saw this now. And truly, I mean, I think this is one of those moments where you realize the man's upset about all the attention baby Jesus is getting by the Christian world on Christmas. And so at some point, he just has to start rattling the cages and saying, hey, look at me. I'm over here. I'm over here. And the way he does it is to fall back on his political strategy of saying, we're not united. We are divided. I have a bunch of enemies. You have those enemies, too. Merry Christmas, but let's get on with the fight. This is the next 4 years.
I don't know if you can tell, Juanita, that David Jolly, I believe, is a preacher's son, because I watched the blush rise in your cheeks as he talked about anyone possibly being jealous of the baby Jesus. But let's just follow what David Jolly said here, right? Let's go with the most generous interpretation of the nuttiness that is coming from the incoming president. If this is, in fact, strategy, and the strategy is that in order to be the hero, there has to be a villain, he hasn't even settled on who the villain is, because then it would mean current President Joe Biden is somehow a villain. Former President Barack Obama is somehow a villain. Justin Trudeau is somehow a villain. The Chinese soldiers who are lovingly but illegally in charge of the Panama Canal, I suppose that those are villains too. This is not what we expect in the way of presidential leadership. And it would be one thing if it were just name calling, but it also is the suggestion of policy and an imperial presidency.
I want to emphasize that point about imperialism, Alicia, because Donald Trump doesn't want to be a president. He said on stage on the campaign, I want to be a dictator on day one. And this language, these tactics mirror authoritarian behavior, which, let's be real, is something that's perpetuated by the people who Donald Trump looks to for examples, including one, Vladimir Putin, right? Like it's eerie to see it play out like this. And honestly, reading it, I was quite depressed, Alicia, because what I realized in reading it is that there really is no value in telling Trump or his supporters that none of this is true. None of this is founded in reality. None of this is founded in facts. And yes, you should learn the difference between a pardon and a commutation, right? Like none of that seems to matter, because they choose to reject reality on a regular basis. And so honestly, that's what I was bracing for, especially as David points out, this is the next 4 years.
It's obviously, Molly, not the first time we have heard him suggest this idea of buying Greenland, this sort of a hot idea that goes back to his first term in office. But I wonder what you make of the obsession, the fact that we're hearing quite a bit about it now.
Yeah, I mean, look, Trump loves the hits, and we're going to see this again. He has a couple things he's really stuck on. Buying Greenland has been something. You'll remember that we saw reporting that it was actually a friend of his who had suggested it. You can't, the whole thing here is that he ran on making things less expensive and ending wars. So how he's going to expand, the American empire, quote unquote. And again, this is about, this idea that somehow America is a sort of Roman Empire, I don't think there's any path to that with these things. And so as much as maybe he's doing it for attention, who knows, maybe he's doing it because he thinks saber rattling will get people on the defensive, whatever it is just functionally undoable, which I think is an important data point when you're talking about those.
David Jolly, I want you to pick up where Molly left off, which is if you buy that the reason that American people voted him back into power was the price of eggs and was a desire to see costs come down and more affordable living. He's already admitted that he may not actually be in control of that. Instead, you see all of the promises he has made via social media. It's also a reminder that you're going to see a lot of diplomacy, leadership via social media. So the fact that you have him saying that Canada should start a, quote, draft Wayne Gretzky movement. I mean, I understand that the man thinks in terms of reality TV, but he doesn't seem to understand the way any of this actually works.
Yeah, I do think, though, take the reality TV part of this. What his ethos is and what his brand strategy is to project strength. And frankly, if his followers see him as strong, they care less about a weakened economy and they care less about weakened national security posture if they see their leader as strong. And so this idea with Greenland, look, he wants to be a president that actually expands the continental United States, expands the territories of the United States, because that happens so rarely historically, and Greenland is of strategic importance to the United States. But it's not like it's controlled by an adversary. It's controlled by the Kingdom of Denmark, and we have a cooperative agreement with Greenland. We use it for a lot of national security posture right now, but Donald Trump is fixated on getting it. And so what does he do for those voters that Molly mentioned? I think ultimately, if he has any economic strategy, is this. He is going to try to burn the economy white hot, heroin into the veins, for 2 to 3 years and not care about the long-term consequences of how he does that. He wants to get money moving fast. He wants to get interest rates down. He'll try to crush the independence of the Fed. We'll see if the Congress will go along with that. He'll try to renew his tax cuts. He'll ignore the long-term consequences of the increased debt. If he approaches the independence of the Fed, he'll ignore the fact that that rattles international markets. But what he wants to do is just get money moving fast and let people feel this strength that he projects, even though ultimately it's a weakness, either because it's a mixture of his kind of toxic masculinity with raw ignorance or with irresponsible decision-making. But for the moment, it'll feel great.
Juanita, David Jolly referenced Denmark, and so I just want to read you this little bit of reporting. This week, Denmark has announced a huge boost in defense spending for Greenland, although the Danish government described the timing of the announcement as, quote, an irony of fate. Indeed, it is. You know, Juanita, I was up late at night on Christmas reading my advance copy of your book, which was apparently driving my husband absolutely bananas because that was the period of time that he was expecting to wrap all of the gifts for me. And so he was like, why are you not in bed? I'm like, because I'm reading Juanita Tolliver's book and it's really good. But part of your core argument is that Shirley Chisholm was just like ahead of the curve on everything, right? And that she sort of understood that you needed to have dynamic and radical change, that you had to be a party that actually offered something to people. And that is where I think your argument dovetails with what David Jolly was just laying out about the incoming president, that there is some appetite to just see a shakeup, right? The shakeup people are going to get is not the shakeup they think they voted for, but it does speak to this desire that you can go back in history, you can go back to your girl Shirley Chisholm. It is actually not necessarily a partisan idea, but that there is an appetite for that type of delivery on the part of the American government.
Only if it benefits the people. And nothing that Donald Trump is proposing realistically benefits any of the people that who voted for him. And I do think one radical part that has emerged from Donald Trump's threats is these dynamic statements from world leaders. The Prime Minister of Greenland saying again, just like he did in 2019, Greenland is not for sale. The President of Panama saying the Panama Canal belongs to Panamanians, as well as the President of Mexico backing him up. I think what the world is primed for is a moment to push back against Donald Trump in unison in a way that diplomacy hasn't seen in a long time. And so I do think there is an opportunity for all of us to learn from global leaders who coordinate and align against Donald Trump and all of these asinine efforts that he's pushing.